My husband forgot to hang up the phone after telling me he loved me, and what I heard next destroyed my entire world. If you're watching this from anywhere in the world right now, I need you to drop a comment and tell me where you're from, because what I'm about to share with you is going to shake you to your core. This isn't just my story, it's a warning about how the people closest to you can become your worst enemies when money is involved. I'm Sarah Martinez, and 4 months ago, I was living what I thought was a perfect life. I was 32, married to a man I believed loved me unconditionally, and I had just inherited my grandmother's estate worth $2.3 million. I thought I was blessed. I thought I was protected. I thought I was loved. I was wrong about everything. The call came on a Tuesday evening in March. I remember because I had just finished arranging the daffodils my grandmother used to love, the ones I planted in her memory garden behind our house in Westfield, New Jersey. My hands still smelled like earth and possibility when my phone rang. It was Marcus, my husband of 3 years, calling from his business trip in Chicago. "Hey, beautiful." His voice came through warm and familiar, that slight rasp he got when he was tired. "How was your day?" I curled up on our cream-colored sectional, the one we'd picked out together at that furniture store in Summit, arguing playfully about whether the throw pillows should be sage green or navy blue. We'd compromised on both, and now those pillows surrounded me like a fortress of memories. Exhausting, I admitted, tucking my legs under me. The lawyer called again about Grandma's estate. "Are still some papers to sign, but Marcus, we're really going to be okay financially. Better than okay." "There." I heard him take a deep breath, and something in that pause felt different. Longer than usual. More calculated. "That's incredible, Sarah. You deserve this. Your grandmother loved you so much." His words were perfect, but there was something underneath them I couldn't name. A hollowness, maybe. Like an echo in an empty room. We talked for 23 more minutes. I remember the exact duration because I checked my call log obsessively afterward, trying to pinpoint when everything started to unravel. We discussed his meetings, my plans for the memorial garden, what we wanted for dinner when he got home Thursday night. Normal things. Married things. The mundane conversations that make up a life built together. "I love you, Sarah. More than you'll ever know," he said finally, and those words felt like a blessing and a curse wrapped in velvet. "I love you too, Marcus. Come home safe to me." "Always," he promised, and I believed him with every cell in my body. But then he didn't hang up. I heard the rustle of fabric, footsteps on what sounded like hardwood floors, and then his voice again, distant now, like he was speaking to someone else in the room. My finger was hovering over the red button to end the call when I heard him laugh. Not the warm, intimate laugh he shared with me, but something colder, sharper. The kind of laugh that cuts through darkness and leaves scars. That laugh made my blood turn to ice water in my veins. And then I heard another laugh. Familiar, but wrong. So completely wrong that my brain refused to process it at first. It was Jake. My stepbrother Jake Remington, who lived in Denver and supposedly barely spoke to Marcus. Jake, who had been in my life since I was 12, when my mother married his father. Jake, who had always been jealous of every good thing that happened to me, but who I thought had grown out of that petty sibling rivalry. What was Jake doing in Chicago with my husband? "She really thinks you mean that." Marcus's voice, clear now, dripping with amusement. "God, she's so naive. Did you see her face when the lawyer read the will? Like she'd won the lottery." My hands started shaking so violently I almost dropped the phone. The walls of our living room seemed to close in around me, and I couldn't breathe properly. This couldn't be happening. This couldn't be my Marcus, my husband, talking about me like I was some kind of mark in a con game. But Jake's response confirmed my worst nightmare. "By the time the meds are done, she won't even believe her own name." His voice carried that same cruel satisfaction I remembered from our teenage years, when he'd hide my homework or tell lies about me to our parents. But this was different. This was adult cruelty, surgical and planned. The meds. What meds? My mind raced backward through the last few weeks. The vitamins Marcus had started bringing me, saying I looked tired and needed extra support during the stressful estate process. The special tea he'd brew for me every night, claiming his mother's recipe would help me sleep better. The small white pills he said were for my headaches, even though I'd never complained about headaches. Oh God. Oh God, no. My blood froze in my veins as the pieces clicked together with horrifying clarity. They were drugging me. They were systematically poisoning me, making me confused and forgetful and dependent, so they could, what? Get my inheritance? Have me declared incompetent? I pressed my hand over my mouth to muffle any sound that might escape, tears streaming down my face as I listened to them plan my destruction. The forged power of attorney documents are ready, Marcus continued, his voice taking on a business-like tone that I'd never heard before. Once she signs them, and she will, because she trusts me completely, we can start moving the money. She'll never know what hit her. And if she gets suspicious? Jake asked. She won't. The dosage keeps her just confused enough to doubt herself, but functional enough that no one else suspects anything. It's perfect. In 6 months, she'll be in a facility somewhere, and we'll have everything. The phone slipped from my numb fingers and clattered onto the hardwood floor. This was really happening. The man I'd shared a bed with for 3 years, the man who held me when I cried over my grandmother's death, the man I'd dreamed of having children with, was systematically destroying my mind and planning to steal everything my family had worked for generations to build. And my stepbrother, blood family, twisted as that connection was helping him do it. I crawled across the floor to retrieve my phone, my knees scraping against the wood as I struggled to understand how my life had become a nightmare in the span of 30 seconds. The call was still connected, and I could hear them moving around, discussing logistics like they were planning a vacation instead of my complete annihilation. We need to be more careful with the dosage, Jake was saying. Last week she asked me if I thought she was forgetting things more than usual. She's starting to notice. I'll handle it, Marcus replied, and I could hear the smile in his voice. She loves me so much, she'll believe anything I tell her. I could convince her the sky is green if I wanted to. The casual cruelty in his tone broke something inside me. Not just my heart, that had shattered the moment I heard him laugh. This broke something deeper. Some fundamental belief I'd held about human decency, about the possibility of genuine love, about my own worth as a person. I ended the call with trembling fingers and sat in the growing darkness of our living room, surrounded by the life we'd built together, trying to process the fact that every single day of our marriage had been a lie. The daffodils I'd planted that afternoon seemed to mock me from the window, their bright yellow faces turning grey in the twilight. Even my grief, even my love for my grandmother, had been weaponized against me. But as I sat there in that crushing darkness, something else began to grow alongside the devastation. Something cold and sharp and absolutely certain. If they thought I was going to disappear quietly into some facility while they spent my family's money, they had severely underestimated Sarah Martinez. They wanted to play games with my mind? Fine. I was about to show them what a truly sharp mind could do when it was focused on revenge. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Marcus's laugh echoing in my head, saw Jake's smug face from 1,000 childhood memories, felt the weight of their betrayal crushing my chest like a stone. Instead, I did something I'd never done before in my life. I started paying attention. Really paying attention. I walked through our house. My house now, I realized, since it had been purchased with my grandmother's money, and saw it with completely different eyes. The special tea Marcus made for me every night sat in a custom tin on the kitchen counter, the one he claimed was a family recipe. I opened it and inhaled. Chamomile, lavender, and something else. Something with a bitter undertone that I'd never noticed because I'd been too trusting, too in love, too stupid to question why my husband suddenly cared so much about my sleep habits. The vitamins were in our medicine cabinet, still in their original bottles, but the seals had been broken and resealed so carefully I almost missed it. Only someone looking for deception would have noticed the slight misalignment of the label, the barely visible residue where new adhesive had been applied. My hands shook as I photographed everything with my phone, documenting evidence I prayed I'd never need but knowing I probably would. Each photo felt like another nail in the coffin of my marriage, Proof that the man I'd promised to love and cherish was systematically poisoning me for money. When Marcus came home Thursday evening, I was ready for him. "Sarah, honey, I'm home." His voice rang through the house, warm and loving, exactly the way it always had. If I hadn't heard that phone call, I would have run to him, thrown my arms around his neck, told him how much I'd missed him. Instead, I stayed in the kitchen, stirring the pasta sauce I'd been making, and called back, "In here. Dinner's almost ready." He appeared in the doorway with his familiar smile, his dark hair slightly mussed from travel, his blue eyes crinkling at the corners the way they did when he was genuinely happy. For a moment, the cognitive dissonance was overwhelming. This was my husband. This was the man who'd held my hand at my grandmother's funeral, who'd spent hours helping me sort through her belongings, who'd made love to me with such tenderness I believed I was the luckiest woman alive. But then he spoke, and I heard the calculation underneath the affection. "Something smells incredible in here. And look at you, beautiful as always." He moved toward me, arms outstretched for a hug, and I had to force myself not to flinch away. His embrace felt like being hugged by a stranger wearing my husband's cologne. "How was Chicago?" I asked against his shoulder, testing my ability to sound normal. "Productive. The Stevenson deal is almost finalized." He pulled back to look at me, his hands resting on my shoulders. "You look tired, honey. Have you been taking those vitamins I got you?" The concern in his voice was so perfectly crafted, so believable, that I understood how he'd fooled me for so long. This wasn't amateur hour deception. This was an artist at work. Every morning, I lied smoothly, though I have been feeling a bit scattered lately, forgetting little things. His eyes lit up with what I now recognized as satisfaction masquerading as worry. "That's probably just the stress of handling your grandmother's estate. These things take a toll. Maybe you should talk to Dr. Peterson about something to help with the anxiety." Dr. Peterson, who played golf with Marcus every other Saturday. Dr. Peterson, who would probably prescribe whatever Marcus suggested because they were friends, because Marcus was charming and successful and seemed like a devoted husband. I nodded thoughtfully. "Maybe you're right. I've been second-guessing myself a lot lately." "That's not like you," he said, stroking my hair with gentle fingers that felt like ice against my scalp. "My strong, smart Sarah. Don't worry, baby. I'll take care of everything. You don't need to stress about any of this." The thing about discovering you're living with a sociopath is that once you know what to look for, you see it everywhere. The way he touched me felt possessive now, not loving. The way he spoke to me carried subtle condescension disguised as care. The way he watched me during dinner, monitoring my reactions when I drank the tea he'd made with such thoughtful attention. I drank it. Not because I trusted him, but because I needed him to believe I still trusted him. I'd figured out how to partially neutralize whatever he was giving me by eating activated charcoal tablets an hour before our evening routine, something I'd learned from a true crime podcast about poisoning cases. The irony wasn't lost on me. "Tell me about your day," he said as we ate, his voice warm with what I'd once thought was genuine interest. So I did. I told him about the memorial garden, about the lawyer's call, about the small decisions I was making regarding my grandmother's estate. And I watched him catalogue every piece of information, filing it away for later use. When we went to bed that night, he made love to me with the same passion and tenderness he always had, and it was the most horrifying experience of my life. Every kiss felt like a betrayal, every whispered endearment like a lie designed to keep me compliant. But I responded the way I always had, because I needed him to believe nothing had changed. Afterward, as he slept peacefully beside me, I stared at the ceiling and planned. The next morning, I did something I'd never done before. I called in sick to work. I was a marketing coordinator for a small firm in downtown Westfield, a job I'd kept even after inheriting my grandmother's money because I loved the work and the people. But today, I needed to be somewhere else. I drove to Princeton, to a small law firm that specialized in estate protection and fraud cases. I'd found them through careful internet research, making sure they had no connections to anyone in Marcus's network. Jennifer Walsh was exactly what I needed, sharp, skeptical, and completely unimpressed by sob stories. Her office was spartanly decorated, all clean lines and professional certificates, the kind of space that demanded honesty. "Mrs. Martinez," she said after I'd explained my situation, "what you're describing is a complex case of financial abuse and conspiracy. If what you suspect is true, we're looking at potential criminal charges, not just civil remediation." "I know," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I have recordings of the phone call. I have photos of tampered medication. I need to know what my options are." She leaned back in her chair, studying me with the kind of intense focus I remembered from my grandmother when she was evaluating a business deal. "The first thing we need to do is get you somewhere safe. If they're drugging you, if they have forged documents, you could be in physical danger." "I'm not ready to run yet," I said quietly. "I need more evidence. And I need to understand the full scope of what they're planning." "Mrs. Martinez. Call me Sarah. And please, just listen for a minute." I leaned forward, meeting her gaze directly. "They think they're so much smarter than me. They think I'm just a naive woman who inherited money she doesn't deserve, who can be manipulated and discarded. If I disappear now, they'll know I found out, and they'll adapt. They'll find new ways to come after me, or they'll target someone else." Jennifer Walsh smiled for the first time since I'd walked into her office. "What exactly are you proposing?" "I want to give them enough rope to hang themselves. I want every detail of their plan on record. I want to understand how long they've been planning this, who else might be involved, and exactly what they intended to do with me once they had my money." I took a deep breath. "And then I want to destroy them so completely that they never recover." She was quiet for a long moment, tapping her pen against her desk. Finally, she nodded. "It's dangerous. You'd be living with someone you know is trying to harm you, pretending everything is normal while gathering evidence that could put them in prison. They've been living with me for 3 years, planning to destroy my mind and steal everything my family built, while pretending to love me," I replied. "I think I can handle a few weeks of pretending I don't know what they are." That afternoon, I drove home with a plan and a small recording device hidden in my purse. I had 43 days until Marcus's next business trip, when I suspected he'd meet with Jake again to finalize whatever they were plotting. 43 days to document everything. 43 days to protect myself while appearing vulnerable. 43 days to learn exactly how deep their betrayal went. As I pulled into our driveway, I saw Marcus's car already there. He was home early, probably eager to continue his careful poisoning routine, to watch for signs that his drugs were working, to play the devoted husband while plotting my destruction. I sat in my car for a moment, looking at our house, the house I bought with blood money, it seemed, and felt something cold and sharp settle into my bones. They thought they knew Sarah Martinez. They thought they understood what I was capable of. They were about to learn they'd been wrong about everything. Have you ever had to pretend to love someone who's actively trying to destroy you? If you have, you know the kind of psychological torture I'm talking about. If you haven't, consider yourself blessed, and please hit that subscribe button because this story gets so much darker from here. 3 weeks into my double life, I'd become an expert at playing the confused, increasingly dependent wife Marcus needed me to be. Every morning, I'd palm the vitamins he handed me with my coffee, hiding them in my cheek until I could spit them out in the bathroom. Every evening, I'd drink the tea he prepared while secretly taking activated charcoal to absorb whatever he'd mixed in. But the hardest part wasn't avoiding the drugs. The hardest part was acting like they were working. "Sarah, honey, you put the milk in the pantry again," Marcus said one morning, his voice heavy with manufactured concern. He was standing by our kitchen island, holding the carton of milk I'd deliberately placed next to the cereal boxes. I blinked slowly, pressing my hand to my forehead in the gesture of confusion I'd been perfecting. "I did. I don't remember doing that." His face immediately shifted into protective husband mode, all worried furrows and gentle touches. "Hey, it's okay. You've been under a lot of stress." He guided me to a chair with hands that felt like they belonged to a stranger. "Maybe we should talk to Dr. Peterson about adjusting your medication." Medication I wasn't actually taking, but that he believed was making me foggy and malleable. I let my shoulders slump in defeat. Maybe you're right. I feel like I'm losing myself lately. The satisfaction that flickered across his features for just a moment would have been invisible to the woman I was 3 weeks ago. But I was learning to read micro-expressions the way my grandmother had learned to read financial reports, with laser focus and an eye for what people were trying to hide. "I'll call his office today," Marcus said, already pulling out his phone. "Don't worry about anything, baby. I've got you." That phrase used to make me feel safe. Now it made my skin crawl. While Marcus was at work that day, I had my second meeting with Jennifer Walsh. This time, I brought more than suspicions. I brought evidence. "The tea contains a low-grade benzodiazepine," she said, reviewing the lab report I'd commissioned through a private testing facility. "Not enough to kill you, but definitely enough to cause confusion, memory issues, and increase suggestibility over time." "And the vitamins?" "A cocktail of sedatives and what appears to be a mild hallucinogenic. Again, carefully dosed to avoid detection but powerful enough to make you doubt your own perceptions." She set the papers down and looked at me with something approaching admiration. "Sarah, this is sophisticated stuff. They are not amateurs." That's when she showed me what her private investigator had uncovered about my husband and stepbrother's backgrounds. Marcus Chen, not Marcus Martinez, as I believed, had been married twice before me. Both wives had died in accidents after inheriting significant money. Car crashes, both of them, within 6 months of changing their wills to make Marcus the primary beneficiary. The first wife, Patricia Chen, had complained to friends about feeling foggy and forgetful in the weeks before her death. The second, Maria Santos, had been found to have significant amounts of sedatives in her system, but the coroner had ruled it suicide despite having no history of mental illness. "There were never enough questions asked," Jennifer explained quietly. "Marcus is charming, he plays the grieving widower perfectly, and there was never quite enough evidence to suggest murder." Jake's history was different but equally disturbing. He'd been involved in 3 separate inheritance fraud cases, always as a peripheral figure, never quite provable as the mastermind. He specialized in targeting vulnerable family members, particularly women who'd recently lost parents or grandparents. "They're a team," I said, the pieces clicking together with horrible clarity. "How long have they been working together?" "At least 5 years that we can prove. Probably longer." Jennifer leaned forward. "Sarah, I need you to understand something. You're not their first victim. You're just their most successful one so far. And if we don't stop them, you won't be their last." That night, I lay in bed next to a man who had killed at least 2 women, listening to him breathe steadily beside me, knowing that he was probably planning the details of my own accident. The knowledge sat in my chest like a stone, heavy and cold and absolutely motivating. 2 days later, Jake called. "Hey, sis." His voice came through my phone with the casual familiarity that had once felt like family and now felt like poison. "How are you holding up with all the estate stuff?" I was in my car, driving home from another meeting with Jennifer, and I'd almost forgotten that Jake was supposed to be my concerned stepbrother, not my would-be murderer. "Oh, hi Jake. I'm struggling a bit." I made my voice small, uncertain. "I feel like I'm forgetting things more lately. Marcus is worried about me." "That's tough," he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "Grief affects everyone differently. Maybe you need some help managing all those financial decisions." There it was. The opening gambit. "I don't know. Marcus has been helping, but there's so much paperwork, so many details." I let my voice trail off, giving him space to offer his assistance. "Well, you know I have experience with estate management from when Dad passed. If you need someone to look over anything, make sure you're not missing important details." My stepfather had left Jake almost nothing when he died, a decision that had caused family drama for years. But Jake had apparently learned enough about estate law during that bitter process to become very dangerous indeed. "Would you?" "That would be such a relief. I feel like I can't trust my own judgment anymore." Of course. That's what family is for. The warmth in his voice was so convincing I almost believed it myself. Why don't I come out to Jersey next week? We can go through everything together. After I hung up, I called Jennifer immediately. They're accelerating the timeline, she said after I'd briefed her. Your stepbrother coming to New Jersey means they're ready to move to the next phase. You need to be extremely careful, Sarah. That evening, Marcus made my tea with special attention, humming softly as he steeped the leaves. I watched him from the living room, this man I'd promised to love and honor, as he carefully measured what I now knew was a carefully calculated dose of drugs designed to make me compliant for whatever Jake had planned. Here you go, beautiful, he said, settling beside me on the couch with his own cup of regular chamomile tea. You look tired tonight. I accepted the cup with trembling hands that weren't entirely fake. I talked to Jake today. He's going to come help me with some of the estate paperwork. Marcus went very still beside me, and I caught the brief flash of surprise before he controlled his expression. Oh? That's nice of him. When? Next week sometime. I didn't realize how much I needed the help until we talked. I sipped the tea, tasting the bitter undercurrent that I now knew was destroying my cognitive function. I feel so scattered lately. Like I can't make decisions about anything important. Well, Jake does have some experience with these things, Marcus said carefully. Though you know I'm always here to help you with anything you need. I know. But maybe having someone outside our marriage look at things would be good? Sometimes I feel like... I paused, as if searching for words. I feel like I'm being too dependent on you. My grandmother always said I should be able to stand on my own 2 feet. It was a perfect setup, giving them both what they wanted, evidence that I was becoming confused and dependent, but also the opening they needed to position Jake as my financial advisor. You're not being too dependent, Marcus said, his arm tightening around my shoulders. You're going through a difficult time. It's natural to need extra support. But I could feel the wheels turning in his head, could practically see him texting Jake the moment I went to bed, adjusting their plans to account for this new development. That night, as Marcus slept beside me, I lay awake thinking about Patricia Chen and Maria Santos. 2 women who had loved the wrong man, who had trusted someone who saw them only as a means to an end. 2 women who had died because they'd been too trusting, too naive, too willing to believe that love was real. I thought about my grandmother, who had built a small fortune through careful decisions and hard work, who had trusted me to honor her legacy. I thought about all the other women Jake had targeted, all the families who had lost their inheritances to his manipulations. And I thought about the recording device hidden in my jewelry box, documenting every conversation, every lie, every moment of this elaborate betrayal. They thought they had me figured out. They thought I was just another mark, another trusting woman to be used and discarded. In exactly 18 days, when Jake arrived and they began to implement whatever final stage they planned, they were going to discover just how wrong they'd been. Jake arrived on a Tuesday morning in April, carrying a leather briefcase and wearing the kind of confident smile that had charmed teachers and fooled parents for decades. I watched him through our kitchen window as he got out of his rental car, and for a moment I was 12 years old again, watching him manipulate his way out of trouble while I got blamed for things I didn't do. But I wasn't 12 anymore. And this time, I was ready for him. Sarah. He wrapped me in a hug that felt like being embraced by a snake. You look tired. Marcus wasn't kidding when he said you've been struggling. I let my shoulders sag, playing up the exhaustion that wasn't entirely fabricated. Living a double life for a month had taken its toll. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Jake. Thank you for coming. Marcus appeared from his home office, and I watched the careful choreography of their greeting. They shook hands like casual acquaintances, made small talk about Jake's flight and the weather, performed the roles of men who barely knew each other beyond their connection to me. If I hadn't heard that phone call, I would have believed every second of it. So, Jake said once we'd settled in the living room with coffee, Marcus filled me in on some of the estate complications. It sounds like there are a lot of moving pieces. I nodded, letting confusion cloud my features. There are so many documents. The lawyer keeps sending me papers to sign, but I feel like I can't focus on the details anymore. Everything seems fuzzy. Jake and Marcus exchanged what they probably thought was a subtle look. To me, it was like watching two predators confirm their prey was properly weakened. That's completely normal, Jake said with practiced sympathy. Estate management is complicated even when you're thinking clearly. Add grief and stress to the mix. He shrugged as if to say, of course you're overwhelmed. Maybe we should start by organizing everything you've received from the lawyers, Marcus suggested. Get it all laid out so we can see what still needs attention. For the next 2 hours, I played the part of the confused widow while they methodically catalogued my grandmother's assets. The house in Cape May that had been in our family for 40 years. The investment portfolio she'd built over decades of careful planning. The business interests that generated steady passive income. The life insurance policies that had made me independently wealthy at 32. I watched Jake's eyes light up as each asset was revealed, watched him calculate numbers in his head, watched him exchange meaningful glances with Marcus when they thought I wasn't looking. To them, I wasn't a person. I was a math problem to be solved, a balance sheet to be transferred into their names. This is a lot to manage, Jake said finally, leaning back in his chair. Sarah, have you thought about setting up a trust? Or maybe a power of attorney arrangement so someone can help you handle the day-to-day financial decisions? There it was. The trap, beautifully laid. I pressed my fingers to my temples as if fighting a headache. Maybe. I don't know. It's all so overwhelming. We could help you find someone trustworthy, Marcus said gently. Maybe someone who understands these kinds of complex estates. Actually, Jake said, as if the idea had just occurred to him, I could probably take care of most of this for you. I handled Dad's estate, and I've helped a few other family friends with similar situations. It wouldn't be any trouble. The beautiful thing about sociopaths is their absolute confidence in their own intelligence. They were so sure I was drugged and confused that they weren't even being particularly subtle anymore. Would you? I let relief flood my voice. That would be such a weight off my shoulders. Of course. That's what family is for. Jake reached for his briefcase. I brought some standard forms with me, just in case. We could get the paperwork started today if you're feeling up to it. Marcus leaned forward. Maybe you should rest first, honey. You look like you're getting another headache. I knew what that meant. More drugs. A higher dose to make sure I was compliant enough to sign whatever they put in front of me. You're probably right, I said, standing on unsteady legs that weren't entirely an act. Jake, would it be okay if we finished this tomorrow? I need to lie down. Absolutely, he said with perfect understanding. This isn't going anywhere. We'll take care of everything, don't worry. As I headed upstairs, I heard Marcus offer to make tea for everyone, heard the quiet conversation that began the moment they thought I was out of earshot. But I didn't need to strain to listen anymore. The recording device Jennifer had given me was capturing everything from its hiding spot inside the decorative bowl on our coffee table. That evening, as Marcus prepared my usual nighttime cocktail of drugs disguised as herbal tea, I excused myself to the bathroom and texted Jennifer a simple message, tomorrow. I also sent a longer message to Detective Ray Morrison of the New Jersey State Police, a contact Jennifer had provided. Subject arriving at location tomorrow 10 a.m. Full documentation requested, preparations complete. When I returned to the living room, Marcus handed me my tea with extra tenderness. Feeling better? A little. I accepted the cup and took a small sip, tasting the familiar bitter note that meant tonight's dose was stronger than usual. They wanted me very compliant for tomorrow's signing session. Marcus, can I ask you something? Anything. I looked into his eyes, those blue eyes I'd once thought held nothing but love for me, and asked, do you think I'm losing my mind? Honestly. The concern that crossed his features was so perfectly crafted, so utterly convincing, that I understood how he'd managed to kill at least 2 other women without anyone suspecting. Baby, no. You're not losing your mind. You're grieving, you're stressed, you're dealing with complicated legal issues that would overwhelm anyone. He sat beside me and pulled me against his chest, stroking my hair with gentle fingers. That's why it's so good that Jake can help. You don't have to carry all this alone. I closed my eyes and let him hold me, let him comfort me with lies, let him believe his performance was working. But inside, I was counting down hours until tomorrow, when everything they'd built would come crashing down around them. I love you, I whispered against his chest. I love you too, he replied, and kissed the top of my head. More than you'll ever know. If he only knew how right he was. The next morning dawned grey and cold, with the kind of persistent drizzle that makes everything look washed out and tired. Jake arrived promptly at 10, his briefcase in hand and his smile perfectly calibrated for a man about to commit the perfect crime. "How are you feeling today?" he asked as I let him in. I swayed slightly on my feet, blinking as if having trouble focusing. The stronger dose Marcus had given me the night before should have left me barely functional, and I needed them to believe it had worked. "Foggy," I admitted, leading him back to the living room where Marcus was already waiting with coffee and a stack of documents. "But ready to get this handled. I just want it all taken care of." "That's exactly what we're going to do," Jake assured me, settling into his chair and opening his briefcase. "I've prepared all the necessary paperwork. Most of it is standard stuff, transferring management authority, establishing oversight protocols, that kind of thing." What he didn't say was that the documents would give him complete control over my finances, the authority to make medical decisions on my behalf, and the power to have me committed to a psychiatric facility if I became difficult. I sat down heavily in my chair, making a show of struggling to concentrate as he spread papers across our coffee table. Power of attorney forms. Medical proxy authorizations. Something that looked suspiciously like commitment papers pre-signed by Dr. Peterson, Marcus's golfing buddy. "This is a lot of paperwork," I said slowly, picking up the first document with hands that shook just enough to seem realistic. "I know it looks overwhelming," Jake said with infinite patience, "but most of it is just formalities. Here, let me walk you through the important parts." For the next 20 minutes, he explained each document in terms designed to confuse rather than clarify, using legal jargon and financial terminology that would have been impenetrable to someone actually under the influence of the drugs they'd been giving me. Marcus sat beside me, occasionally squeezing my hand in support while I pretended to struggle with basic comprehension. I think I understand," I said finally, reaching for the pen Jake had placed strategically beside the papers. "You'll handle everything, and I don't have to worry about any of it anymore." "Exactly," Jake said, and I caught the flash of triumph in his eyes. "You can focus on getting better, and we'll make sure your grandmother's legacy is properly managed." I picked up the pen, held it over the first signature line, and then stopped. "Sarah." Marcus's voice carried just a hint of tension. "What is it?" I looked up at both of them, two men who had spent months planning my destruction, who thought they were minutes away from everything they'd worked for. "I feel like I should call my grandmother's lawyer first, just to make sure this is the right thing to do." The silence that followed was electric. I watched Jake and Marcus exchange a look that lasted exactly 3 seconds too long, watched them recalibrate their approach in real time. "Of course," Jake said smoothly. "Though you should know that most lawyers charge by the hour for consultations, even simple ones. This is pretty standard stuff, but if you want that extra reassurance." "Maybe we should wait," Marcus said, his hand tightening on my shoulder. "You look tired, honey. Maybe you should rest before making any big decisions." And that's when I heard it. The sound that changed everything. Marcus's phone, sitting on the coffee table next to the documents, started buzzing with an incoming call. He glanced at it, clearly intending to decline, but his fingers slipped and he accidentally accepted the call instead. "Marcus." A woman's voice filled the room, tinny through the phone speaker. "Marcus, are you there?" The blood drained from his face as he realized what had happened, but it was too late. The call was connected, and the woman on the other end was speaking. "I just wanted to confirm the wire transfer instructions for the Peterson account. Is everything still on schedule for this afternoon? Jake went very still in his chair, his eyes locked on Marcus's phone like it was a poisonous snake. Hang on, Marcus said, reaching for the phone, but I was faster. I grabbed it before he could end the call, holding it up between us like a weapon. Who is this? I asked the woman on the other end, my voice suddenly clear and strong in a way that made both men freeze. I'm sorry, who am I speaking with? The woman replied, confusion evident in her tone. This is Sarah Martinez. This is my husband's phone. You mentioned a Peterson account. The silence stretched for what felt like eternity. Then the woman said, I think there's been a misunderstanding. I'll call back later. The line went dead. I looked at the phone in my hands, then at Marcus's face, which had gone completely white. Then at Jake, who was slowly reaching for his briefcase as if preparing to run. Well, I said quietly, setting the phone down on the coffee table. That was interesting. Sarah, Marcus started, but I held up my hand. No. I don't think I want to hear whatever lie you're about to tell me. I stood up, and both men could see that the confused, drugged woman they thought they'd been manipulating was gone. Peterson account. That would be Dr. Peterson, wouldn't it? Your golfing buddy who was going to declare me mentally incompetent. The mask slipped from Marcus's face like water. For the first time since I'd known him, I was seeing the real man underneath the performance. You don't understand. I understand perfectly. I walked over to the decorative bowl on our coffee table and pulled out the recording device that had been capturing everything. I understand that you've been drugging me for months. I understand that you and my stepbrother have been planning to steal my inheritance and have me committed. I understand that you've probably done this before. Jake shot to his feet. Sarah, you're obviously confused. Confused. I laughed, and it was not a pleasant sound. I stopped taking your drugs 3 weeks ago, Jake. I've been documenting everything. The poisoned tea, the tampered vitamins, the forged documents, all of it. The silence that followed was deafening. I could see them both calculating, trying to figure out how much I knew, how long I'd known it, whether they could still salvage their plan. That's when I walked over to the window and waved at the unmarked car that had been parked across the street since 9:30 that morning. I also called the police, I said conversationally. They should be here any minute. The transformation in both men was instantaneous. Marcus lunged toward me, but I was ready for him. The self-defense classes I'd been taking secretly for the past month weren't just for show. Jake was already moving toward the back door, but he stopped when Detective Morrison and 3 uniformed officers entered through the front door, weapons drawn. Sarah Martinez. Detective Morrison asked, though he already knew the answer. We'd met twice to plan this moment. That's me. These are the men I told you about. The documents they wanted me to sign are on the coffee table, along with the recording device that captured their entire conversation. As the officers read them their rights, Marcus looked at me with something approaching respect mixed with absolute hatred. You played us, he said quietly. I learned from the best, I replied. Jake, being handcuffed behind my couch, shook his head in disbelief. How long have you known? I thought about that phone call 4 weeks ago, the moment that had shattered my world and rebuilt it into something harder, sharper, infinitely more dangerous. Long enough. If you've been following this story from the beginning, you know that hearing my husband's accidental phone call was just the start of this nightmare. What you don't know yet is how deep the rabbit hole went, and how many lives these men had destroyed before they got to me. The next few hours were a blur of police interviews, evidence collection, and the surreal experience of watching my husband and stepbrother get loaded into separate police cars from my living room window. Detective Morrison was thorough and professional, but I could see the disgust in his eyes as he catalogued the scope of their plan. Mrs. Martinez, we're going to need you to come to the station to give a formal statement, he said as his team finished photographing the forged documents Jake had brought. We also need to discuss protective measures. If these men are part of a larger operation, you could still be at risk. I nodded, but my attention was caught by one of the evidence techs holding up a small vial he'd found in Jake's briefcase. What is that? I asked. Detective Morrison glanced at it and his expression darkened. We'll have to get it tested, but if I had to guess, something a lot stronger than what they were giving you in the tea. Probably their endgame drug. The implication hit me like a physical blow. If I had signed those papers, if I had given them the authority they needed, that vial would have been my final dose. Not enough to kill me cleanly, but enough to leave me in a vegetative state, completely dependent on their care while they drained my accounts. How many others? I asked quietly. Others? How many other women have they done this to? Detective Morrison was quiet for a long moment. Based on what your lawyer provided us, and what we're uncovering now, we think at least 7, going back 6 years. You're the first one who figured it out before. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. At the police station, I spent 3 hours giving my statement, going through every detail of the past month, every piece of evidence I'd collected, every conversation I'd recorded. By the time I was done, it was nearly 8 o'clock and I felt emotionally drained in a way I hadn't expected. There's something else, Detective Morrison said as we wrapped up. The phone call that started all of this? The woman who called about the Peterson account? We traced that number. He slid a photograph across the table. It showed a woman in her 40s with dark hair and kind eyes, the kind of face you'd trust instantly. Rebecca Martinez, he said. She works for a private medical billing company that specializes in psychiatric facilities. She's also Marcus's first wife. I stared at the photo, my mind struggling to process this information. His first wife? But I thought, the investigator said his first wife died in a car accident. Patricia Chen died in a car accident. Rebecca Martinez was wife number 1, before Patricia. Apparently, she got suspicious and divorced him before he could implement whatever he had planned for her. But she never stopped watching him. The pieces clicked together with horrible clarity. She's been tracking him. For 5 years. She's the one who provided us with information about Patricia Chen and Maria Santos. She's been building a case against him, but she never had enough evidence to make it stick. Detective Morrison leaned forward. That accidental phone call? She says it wasn't accidental. She's been calling him at strategic times for months, hoping to catch him in a compromising situation. She saved my life, I said quietly. She saved your life, he confirmed. That night, I stayed in a hotel room paid for by the county's victim services program. I couldn't face going back to the house I'd shared with Marcus, couldn't bear to sleep in the bed where he'd held me while planning my destruction. Instead, I lay awake in a generic hotel room, processing the fact that my entire marriage had been a lie, that the man I'd loved had never existed. But there was something else keeping me awake. Something Detective Morrison had mentioned in passing that I couldn't stop thinking about. Mrs. Martinez, there's going to be a lot of media attention around this case. The financial fraud, the drugging, the conspiracy, it's going to be big news. Are you prepared for that? I wasn't. I had never considered that my private nightmare would become public entertainment, that my marriage and betrayal would be dissected by strangers on social media and local news programs. The first news van appeared in the hotel parking lot the next morning. By noon, there were 5. Sarah Martinez, the New Jersey woman who outsmarted an elaborate inheritance fraud scheme, the reporter was saying as I watched from my hotel room window. Sources close to the investigation say Martinez spent weeks gathering evidence while pretending to be unaware of the plot against her. They were calling me a hero. The woman who was too smart to be fooled, who turned the tables on her would-be destroyers. But sitting in that hotel room, eating take-out Chinese food and watching my life become a cautionary tale, I didn't feel heroic. I felt hollow. My phone rang. It was Jennifer Walsh. Sarah, how are you holding up? I've been better, I admitted. The media attention is overwhelming. I know. Listen, there's something we need to discuss. With Marcus and Jake both in custody, and with the evidence you gathered, we're looking at criminal charges that could put them away for decades. But there's also the civil side to consider. Civil side? Your inheritance, your assets, the damages to your health and emotional well-being. We're talking about millions of dollars in restitution, Sarah. Not just from them, but from everyone who was complicit in this scheme. Over the next hour, she explained the web of corruption that was beginning to unravel. Dr. Peterson, who had been prepared to falsify psychiatric evaluations in exchange for a percentage of my inheritance. The private medical billing company that Rebecca worked for, which had been facilitating fraudulent commitments across 3 states. The psychiatric facility in Pennsylvania where I would have ended up, heavily sedated and forgotten while my money disappeared. This is bigger than just you, Jennifer said. This is an organized operation that's been targeting vulnerable women for years. Your case is going to bring all of it down. That evening, I got a visitor I wasn't expecting. Rebecca Martinez, Marcus's first wife, sat across from me in the hotel lobby, her kind face marked by the same exhaustion I felt. I wanted to apologize, she said quietly. I've been tracking Marcus for years, trying to prevent him from doing to other women what he tried to do to me. When I realized he'd married you, I started watching more closely. But I should have warned you sooner. Why didn't you? I asked, though I already suspected the answer. Because no one ever believes it until they see it for themselves, she said sadly. When I tried to tell Patricia Chen that Marcus was dangerous, she accused me of being a jealous ex-wife. Maria Santos had me blocked on social media before I could even reach out to her. We sat in silence for a moment, 2 women bonded by our shared experience of loving a man who had never really existed. The accidental phone call, I said finally. How did you know to time it exactly right? Rebecca smiled for the first time since sitting down. I've been calling him at random times for months, hoping to catch him in a compromising conversation. Yesterday morning, I saw the news report about a suspicious death in Ohio that matched his pattern. I figured if he was active again, he'd be moving fast. So I called. Thank you, I said, and meant it more than any words I'd ever spoken. Don't thank me yet, she replied. This is just the beginning. Marcus has lawyers, resources, connections. Jake has family members who might try to retaliate. The investigation is going to drag on for months, maybe years. She was right, of course. As I lay in bed that night, scrolling through news articles about my case, I realized that exposing Marcus and Jake was only the first step. The real fight was just beginning. But for the first time in weeks, I felt something I hadn't expected: excitement. They had underestimated me once, thinking I was just another naive woman to be used and discarded. Now the entire criminal justice system was going to see what Sarah Martinez was really capable of when she set her mind to something. And I was just getting started. 3 days after Marcus and Jake's arrest, I learned something that changed everything I thought I knew about my own story. I was back in Jennifer Walsh's office, going through the mountain of evidence the police had collected, when she set down a folder with an expression I'd never seen before. Sarah, there's something else. Something the detective asked me to share with you privately before it becomes part of the official record. Inside the folder were financial documents dating back 7 years. Bank statements, wire transfers, property records, insurance policies. At first glance, they looked like routine paperwork. But as Jennifer walked me through them, a horrifying picture emerged. My grandmother hadn't died of natural causes. The medical examiner reopened her case yesterday, Jennifer said quietly. They found traces of the same compounds in her hair follicles that Marcus was giving you. She was being drugged for months before her death. I stared at the pages, trying to process what I was hearing. My grandmother, the strongest woman I'd ever known, had been murdered. Slowly, methodically, carefully. Marcus never met my grandmother, I said weakly. They never even spoke on the phone. No, but Jake did. Jake spent Thanksgiving at your grandmother's house 3 years ago. Christmas the year before that. He had access to her food, her medications, her daily routine. The memories came flooding back. Jake volunteering to help with holiday meals, bringing special teas for Grandma's arthritis, offering to organize her pills when she complained about forgetting to take them. I had been grateful for his attention, touched that he cared so much about our grandmother's well-being. They've been planning this for 3 years, I whispered. Longer. The financial records show Jake started researching your grandmother's assets 4 years ago. That's when he approached Marcus with the plan. I thought about my wedding day, how Jake had given such a touching speech about family and love and taking care of each other. How Marcus had seemed so moved by it, how proud I'd been that my stepbrother approved of my husband. They had already been partners by then. They had already decided to kill my grandmother and steal her money through me. There's more, Jennifer said, and I didn't think my heart could take more revelations. She showed me photographs of a storage unit Jake had rented in Pennsylvania. Inside, investigators had found detailed files on 12 different women. Photos, financial records, family histories, psychological profiles. A literal hunting manual for vulnerable targets. You weren't random, she explained. You were selected. They researched you for months before Marcus ever approached you at that coffee shop. The coffee shop where we'd met. The cute story I'd told at our wedding reception about Marcus spilling his latte on my laptop and then buying me dinner to apologize. It had never been an accident. It had never been fate. Every moment of our relationship, from the first date to our wedding day to the morning he'd brought me poison vitamins, had been choreographed. How many others are there? I asked. Living? You're the only one who figured it out in time. But the FBI is now investigating 12 suspicious deaths across 6 states. They think this operation has been active for at least 8 years. 8 years. Dozens of women. Millions of dollars in stolen inheritances. I left Jennifer's office that day feeling like I was floating outside my own body. The woman who had walked in thinking she'd survived a terrible betrayal walked out knowing she'd escaped from something much darker. That evening, I did something I hadn't done since the night I heard Marcus's phone call. I went back to our house. Standing in the driveway, looking at the home we'd shared for 3 years, I tried to find some memory that had been genuine. Some moment when Marcus had dropped his mask and shown me something real. There weren't any. Inside, the house felt like a crime scene. Police tape still blocked off areas where evidence had been collected. The living room where Jake had spread out his forged documents looked like a battlefield. I walked upstairs to our bedroom. My bedroom, I corrected myself, and opened Marcus's closet. His clothes still hung there, organized by color and season the way he'd always kept them. I ran my hands through the pockets of his jackets, not looking for anything specific, just trying to understand how I'd lived with a stranger for 3 years without knowing it. That's when I found the notebook. It was tucked into the breast pocket of the suit he'd worn to our wedding, wrapped in plastic like evidence. Which, I realized, is exactly what it was. Inside were detailed notes about me. My daily routines, my emotional triggers, my fears and insecurities. Observations about how I responded to different types of manipulation, what worked to make me compliant, what made me suspicious. S becomes withdrawn when she thinks she's disappointed someone. One entry read. Use guilt more than anger for best results. S responds well to physical affection when upset. Touch is key to maintaining emotional control. S has abandonment issues from father's death. Emphasize permanence and security in relationship. It went on for pages. 3 years of marriage reduced to a psychological profile, a manual for manipulation written in my husband's careful handwriting. I should have been devastated. I should have broken down, finally allowing myself to grieve for the marriage that had never existed, the love that had been nothing but calculation. Instead, I felt something cold and sharp settling in my chest. Something that felt a lot like rage, but more focused, more purposeful. If you've been watching this story unfold, you might be thinking this is where I tell you about breaking down, about therapy and healing and learning to trust again. And maybe that's what should have happened. But that's not what happened. What happened was that I realized Marcus and Jake had made one critical error in their planning. They had taught me exactly how to destroy someone systematically, methodically, completely. I spent that night in my real home, surrounded by the detritus of my fake marriage, reading every page of Marcus's notes about me. Learning how he'd studied me, how he'd crafted his approach, how he'd maintained his psychological control. And I started taking notes of my own. Because there was something the police investigation wouldn't touch, something the criminal justice system couldn't handle. Marcus and Jake were going to prison, probably for the rest of their lives. But the other victims, the 12 dead women, their families, the people who had loved them and lost them, they deserved more than just justice. They deserved revenge. And I was going to make sure they got it. The next morning, I called Detective Morrison. Detective, I want to make a proposition. I'm listening. I want to go undercover. There was a long pause. Mrs. Martinez, these men are in custody. The case is closed. The case against Marcus and Jake is closed. But their operation was bigger than just them. There are other people involved, other victims we haven't found yet. And there are copycat operations out there, learning from their methods. Another pause. What exactly are you proposing? I want to pose as a potential victim. I want to draw out their associates, their contacts, anyone else who might be running similar schemes. I want to stop this from happening to anyone else. Mrs. Martinez, you're a civilian. You're not trained for undercover work. It's too dangerous. Detective, I've been living undercover for a month already. I fooled 2 professional con artists into thinking I was drugged and helpless while I documented their entire operation. I think I can handle it. What I didn't tell him was that it wasn't about the other victims anymore. It wasn't about justice or preventing future crimes. It was about the look in Marcus's eyes when he'd realized I'd outsmarted him. The moment when he understood that he'd underestimated me, that his perfect victim had become his perfect nemesis. I wanted that look again. I wanted it from every person who had ever profited from the deaths of innocent women. I wanted to see the moment when they realized they'd picked the wrong target. And I was willing to risk everything to get it. What I'm about to tell you next might shock some of you, and I need you to stick with me here because this is where the real story begins. If you're new to this channel, make sure to hit that subscribe button and check the description box for more stories like this, because what happened next was unlike anything I could have imagined. Detective Morrison said no. FBI agent Sarah Chen, who had taken over the federal investigation, said no. My lawyer Jennifer Walsh said absolutely not. Even Rebecca Martinez, who had spent 5 years hunting Marcus, told me I was crazy. But sometimes being called crazy is just another way of being told you're seeing something other people are afraid to see. I did it anyway. The first thing I needed was a new identity, or at least a new story. Sarah Martinez, the woman who'd exposed the inheritance fraud scheme, was too famous now. My face had been on the news, my story told in newspapers across the country. I needed to become someone else, someone vulnerable enough to attract the attention of predators but strong enough to survive when things went wrong. I became Emma Thompson, a 34-year-old widow from Portland, Oregon. Emma had recently inherited her late husband's tech company and was struggling to manage the sudden wealth while dealing with complicated grief. She was lonely, isolated, and desperately seeking someone to trust with her overwhelming new responsibilities. Emma was everything predators look for in a target: wealthy, vulnerable, and naive about financial matters. It took me 3 weeks to establish Emma's online presence. Social media accounts full of carefully crafted posts about loss and confusion. A LinkedIn profile showcasing her inherited business responsibilities. Dating profiles on apps where women like her typically got targeted by sophisticated con artists. The first response came within 48 hours of going live. Hi Emma, I saw your profile and I had to reach out. I lost my wife 2 years ago, so I understand how overwhelming it can be to suddenly handle everything alone. Would you like to get coffee sometime? I'm a financial advisor here in Portland, and I'd be happy to offer some guidance, no strings attached. His name was David Chen. 42 years old, recently divorced, with 2 teenage children and a practice specializing in estate management for widows and widowers. His photos showed a kind face with laugh lines around his eyes, the kind of man who looked trustworthy and stable. His profile was perfect. Too perfect. I ran his information through every background check service I could find. David Chen existed, but his history only went back 3 years. Before that, nothing. No college records, no employment history, no trace of the life story he claimed on his dating profile. David Chen was as fake as Emma Thompson. We met at a coffee shop in downtown Portland, the same kind of comfortable, public place where Marcus had accidentally spilled his latte on my laptop 4 years ago. David was exactly what he'd appeared to be online: warm, attentive, genuinely concerned about my fictional struggles with inherited wealth. "The thing about sudden wealth," he said, stirring sugar into his coffee with practiced ease, "is that it changes how people see you. You can't trust anyone's motivations anymore." The irony was almost overwhelming. "That's exactly how I feel," I told him, letting vulnerability creep into Emma's voice. "My husband handled everything financial. I don't even know where to start." "Have you considered setting up a trust? Or maybe finding someone to help manage the day-to-day decisions while you figure things out?" There it was. The same opening gambit Jake had used, the same approach Marcus had perfected over years of targeting vulnerable women. Over the next 2 weeks, David courted Emma with the kind of sophisticated emotional manipulation I now recognized as professional-level predation. He listened to her fears with perfect empathy, offered solutions that made her more dependent on his guidance, and slowly began suggesting that she needed more comprehensive help than just financial advice. "Have you thought about a power of attorney arrangement?" he asked over dinner at an upscale restaurant where he'd insisted on paying, demonstrating his generosity and financial stability. "Just for the business decisions. You'd still have complete control over everything personal." I nodded thoughtfully, playing the role of a woman who was grateful to have found such a caring advisor. "Would you be willing to help with something like that?" His smile was warm and reassuring. "Of course. That's what I'm here for." But David had made one critical mistake that Marcus and Jake had avoided: he was working alone. The next day, I broke into his office. "I want to be clear about something here. I'm not encouraging anyone watching this to commit crimes. I'm not a professional, and what I did was illegal and dangerous. But I was beyond caring about legal niceties at that point. I needed to know who David really was and what he was planning for Emma Thompson." His office was in a converted warehouse building with minimal security, the kind of space that looked professional but could be abandoned quickly if necessary. Inside, I found exactly what I'd expected: files on 12 different women across 6 states, all widows or divorcees who had recently come into money. Emma Thompson's file was already 3 inches thick. But what I found in his computer changed everything. David Chen wasn't working alone. He was part of a network of at least 15 different operators, all using similar methods to target wealthy women in transition. They shared information, techniques, and even victims when one operator's cover was blown. And at the center of it all, coordinating everything, was someone using the alias M. King. Marcus King. My husband, somehow still running his operation from jail. The next day, I called Detective Morrison from a burner phone. "Detective, it's Sarah Martinez. I need to ask you something about Marcus's jail communications. Is he allowed phone calls?" "Mrs. Martinez, you shouldn't be. Is he allowed phone calls?" A sigh. "Limited, supervised calls to his attorney and family members." "Why?" "Because he's still running his operation. There are at least 15 other people doing exactly what he and Jake did to me, and he's coordinating all of it from his jail cell." I could hear papers rustling in the background. "Do you have evidence of this?" "I have names, dates, financial records, and photographs of active case files. But detective, there's something else. I think one of the other operators is planning to kill his current target tomorrow night." The silence stretched for nearly 30 seconds. "Where are you, Mrs. Martinez?" "Portland." "And detective?" "Emma Thompson is about to disappear forever. But she's going to take their entire network with her." That night, I sat in my hotel room overlooking the city where Emma Thompson had lived for exactly 3 weeks, and I made a decision that would change the rest of my life. I wasn't going to just expose these men. I wasn't going to just stop them from hurting other women. I was going to destroy them so completely that no one would ever even think about following in their footsteps. Emma Thompson had served her purpose. She'd given me access to their network, shown me how they operated, revealed the scope of what we were really dealing with. Now it was time for Sarah Martinez to finish what she'd started. The war wasn't over when Marcus and Jake went to jail. It was just beginning. And I was about to teach them all what happened when they picked the wrong woman to target. What happened next challenged everything I thought I knew about justice, revenge, and the lengths I was willing to go to protect other women from what I'd survived. The FBI raid on David Chen's office happened at 6 a.m. on a Thursday morning. By then, I'd already copied every file in his computer, photographed every document in his cabinets, and compiled a comprehensive dossier on the entire network of predators that Marcus was still coordinating from his jail cell. Agent Sarah Chen, no relation to David, despite the shared surname, met me in a secure conference room at the Portland FBI field office. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe 35, with the kind of sharp intelligence I'd learned to recognize in women who had fought their way into male-dominated fields. "Mrs. Martinez, what you've done is incredibly dangerous and completely illegal." "But effective," I replied, sliding a USB drive across the table. "Everything I found in David Chen's office is on there. Financial records, victim profiles, communication logs with other operators in the network. You now have enough evidence to shut down an inheritance fraud operation that spans 12 states and has stolen over $50 million from vulnerable women." She picked up the drive but didn't plug it into her computer. "You could be facing federal charges for breaking and entering, theft, tampering with evidence. Are you going to arrest me?" Agent Chen was quiet for a long moment, studying my face with the kind of intensity that made me think she was calculating odds and outcomes. Finally, she plugged in the USB drive. What we discovered over the next 4 hours redefined everything we thought we knew about Marcus and Jake's operation. They weren't just targeting random wealthy women. They were part of a sophisticated network that had been operating for over a decade, with connections to corrupt medical professionals, fraudulent legal services, and even employees at major banks who help facilitate the financial transfers. "This is a multi-million-dollar criminal enterprise," Agent Chen said, scrolling through spreadsheets that detailed their profits from each victim. "We're talking about RICO charges, federal conspiracy, murder for hire." "Murder for hire." She turned her computer screen toward me. It showed a chat log between Marcus and someone identified only as Phoenix_Z. Phoenix_Z. Thompson situation needs resolution. Target getting suspicious. M_King. Standard protocol. Medical emergency. Accidental overdose. Make it look like suicide attempt gone wrong. Phoenix_Z. Understood. Timeline. M_King. Within 48 hours. Can't let her talk to other advisors. I stared at the screen, realizing that Emma Thompson, my fictional identity, had been marked for death. If I hadn't exposed David Chen when I did, I would have been found in some Portland hotel room, another tragic suicide statistic that no one would have questioned. "How is Marcus communicating with them from jail?" I asked. "His attorney. Messages hidden in legal correspondence that gets privileged protection from monitoring." Agent Chen's expression darkened. "We're getting warrants for the attorney's communications now, but it'll take time to build a case that will stick." That's when I made the decision that would define the rest of this story. I have a better idea. Over the next hour, I laid out a plan that made Agent Chen question my sanity and her own career prospects. Instead of waiting months for the slow machinery of federal prosecution to build cases against 15 different operators across 12 states, I wanted to draw them all out at once. "You want to fake your own death," she said slowly, as if saying it out loud would make her realize how crazy it sounded. Emma Thompson's death. Sarah Martinez would be safely in protective custody while Emma Thompson dies in what appears to be a successful murder orchestrated by the network. When they think they've won, when they think they're safe, we take them all down simultaneously. The risk is enormous. If anything goes wrong. If we don't do this, how many more women die while you're building your federal case? How many more families lose their grandmothers, their mothers, They're sisters to these people. Agent Chen was quiet for a long time, staring at the evidence spread across her conference table. Files on dozens of victims, financial records showing millions in stolen assets, communication logs proving an ongoing conspiracy that reached into law enforcement, medical facilities, and legal practices across the country. There would have to be conditions, she said finally. Full FBI protection, complete coordination with local law enforcement, and the moment we think you're in real danger, we pull you out. Deal. The plan we developed was elegant in its simplicity. Emma Thompson would be found dead in her Portland hotel room, an apparent suicide that would satisfy the network's need to eliminate a problematic target. The local news would report it as a tragic end to a woman overwhelmed by sudden wealth and loss. But Emma Thompson's death would trigger a series of automated emails I'd prepared, sent to every major news outlet in the country. Emails containing copies of all the evidence I'd gathered, along with a video confession explaining everything that had been done to me and dozens of other women. If they kill Emma Thompson, they're going to create the biggest inheritance fraud scandal in American history, I explained to Agent Chen. Every operator in the network will be exposed simultaneously. They won't have time to run or destroy evidence because they won't know it's coming until it's too late. The fake death was scheduled for Saturday night. Emma Thompson would be found Sunday morning by hotel staff, and by Sunday afternoon, the story would be national news. Saturday evening, I lay in the Portland hotel room that would serve as Emma's death scene, wearing a wire and surrounded by FBI agents positioned throughout the building. At 9:47 p.m., my phone rang. It was David Chen. Emma, I just heard from a contact at the hospital. There's been a development with your estate planning that we need to address immediately. Can you meet me tonight? This was it. The invitation to what they thought would be my murder. Tonight. David, it's almost 10 o'clock. I know it's late, but this can't wait until Monday. There are some documents that need to be signed before the banks close Monday morning, or you could lose access to significant portions of your inheritance. The lie was smooth, professional, designed to create urgency and fear that would make a vulnerable woman comply immediately. Okay, I said, letting Emma's voice shake with uncertainty. Where should I meet you? He gave me an address for a warehouse district location, exactly the kind of isolated spot where a suicide could be staged without witnesses. Emma. His voice was gentle, concerned. Don't worry about anything. I'm going to take care of you. Those words, so similar to what Marcus had said to me for 3 years, made my blood run cold. 20 minutes later, I walked into what I knew was supposed to be my death scene. The warehouse was dark except for a single lamp illuminating a table with documents spread across it. David was waiting with 2 other men I didn't recognize, all of them wearing the kind of calm confidence that comes from having done this many times before. Emma, thank you for coming, David said warmly. I know this is unusual, but these gentlemen are here to witness the paperwork. Just a formality. One of the men stepped forward, and I saw the syringe in his hand. This will help you relax, he said in a voice like velvet. Just a mild sedative to help with the anxiety. Very common for situations like this. I looked at the 3 men surrounding me, at the syringe that contained what was probably a lethal dose of something that would make my death look like suicide, at the documents on the table that would transfer Emma Thompson's fictional wealth to David Chen's very real accounts. And then I smiled. Gentlemen, I said, I think there's been a misunderstanding. The FBI agents came through every door simultaneously, their weapons drawn and their voices clear. FBI. Nobody move. David's face went through a fascinating series of expressions, confusion, realization, and finally, a kind of grudging respect as he understood he'd been completely outmaneuvered. You're not Emma Thompson, he said quietly. No, I'm not. I'm Sarah Martinez. And you've just become part of the biggest inheritance fraud bust in FBI history. As they handcuffed the 3 men, Agent Chen approached with a tablet showing breaking news alerts from across the country. The coordinated raids were happening simultaneously in 12 states, targeting every member of the network we'd identified. 15 arrests so far, she said. And we're just getting started. But even as I watched Marcus's entire criminal empire crumble in real time, I knew this still wasn't over. Because there was one more person who needed to face justice. Someone who had been pulling strings from the beginning. Someone whose role in this conspiracy I was only just beginning to understand. Dr. Peterson. Marcus's golfing buddy. The man who would have declared me mentally incompetent while Marcus and Jake stole my inheritance. The man who had been diagnosing vulnerable women as unstable for over a decade, providing the medical justification for their financial exploitation. Sunday morning, while the news was breaking about the nationwide inheritance fraud bust, I paid Dr. Peterson a visit at his private practice. It was time to have a conversation about medical ethics, criminal conspiracy, and what happens when you bet against the wrong woman. Dr. James Peterson's office was everything you'd expect from a successful psychiatrist. Leather furniture, expensive artwork, diplomas, and certifications covering an entire wall. He was seeing a patient when I arrived Sunday morning, so I waited in his reception area, reading magazines and listening to the muffled sound of conversation through his closed door. The FBI had given me exactly 2 hours to get whatever information I could from Peterson before they moved in with arrest warrants. 2 hours to confront the man who had been prepared to destroy my mind for money, who had probably done it to dozens of other women over the years. When his 10 o'clock patient left, I walked into his office without waiting to be announced. Dr. Peterson, I'm Sarah Martinez. I think we need to talk. He looked up from his notes with the kind of professional smile that probably cost him years of practice to perfect. But I watched it falter as he recognized my name. Mrs. Martinez. I wasn't expecting you. How can I help you today? I closed the door behind me and took a seat in the chair across from his desk, the same chair where countless vulnerable women had sat while he evaluated their mental competency for Marcus and his associates. You can start by explaining how a licensed psychiatrist gets involved in inheritance fraud and conspiracy to commit murder. The color drained from his face, but his training kicked in immediately. Mrs. Martinez, I think there may be some confusion about my relationship with your husband. If you're having difficulties processing recent events, I'd be happy to refer you to a colleague who specializes in trauma therapy. Even now, even knowing that his entire operation had been exposed, he was still trying to manipulate me. Still suggesting that my perceptions couldn't be trusted, that I needed professional help to understand reality. Dr. Peterson, the FBI has been recording your phone calls for 3 weeks. They have documented evidence of your communication with Marcus Chen, David Chen, and 14 other men involved in systematic fraud targeting widowed and divorced women. Your diagnostic reports on their victims are part of a federal RICO case that's going to put you in prison for the rest of your life. The professional mask slipped completely. For the first time, I was seeing the real James Peterson, calculating, cruel, and absolutely panicked. You have no idea what you're dealing with, he said quietly. This goes deeper than you understand. There are people involved in this who have the power to make you disappear completely. Deeper how? He stood up and walked to his window, looking out at the parking lot where I was certain FBI agents were already positioning themselves. The women we targeted weren't random, Sarah. They were selected for very specific reasons. Because they had money and were vulnerable. No. He turned back to face me, and his expression was almost pitying. Because they had money and no living male relatives to ask questions when they died. The implication hit me like a physical blow. You weren't just stealing inheritances. You were eliminating bloodlines. We were consolidating wealth. Taking money that would be wasted on emotional spending and charitable donations and putting it to more productive use. Building something bigger. Building what? Dr. Peterson smiled, and it was the most chilling expression I'd ever seen. An empire, Sarah. A network of influence and control that spans multiple industries. Healthcare, legal services, financial planning, real estate development. We've been funding it all with inherited wealth from women who never deserved it in the first place. I stared at him, trying to process the scope of what he was describing. This wasn't just criminal fraud. This was systematic elimination of women's financial independence, a deliberate effort to prevent inherited wealth from passing through female lineage. How many? I asked. How many what? How many women have you killed? He was quiet for a long moment, studying my face with professional interest. Do you really want to know? Or would you prefer to maintain your illusion that this was just about your inheritance? Tell me. Over the past 12 years, our network has facilitated the deaths of 137 women. We've consolidated approximately $400 million in inherited wealth. We've prevented that money from being spent on frivolous emotional purchases, donated to ineffective charities, or left to other women who would only waste it. 137 women. Grandmothers, mothers, daughters, sisters. All murdered for money that these men believed women didn't deserve to inherit. And you think this makes you righteous, I said quietly. I think this makes us practical. Women are too emotional to handle significant wealth responsibly. They make decisions based on feelings rather than logic. They give money to causes that make them feel good rather than investments that generate returns. We were correcting a fundamental flaw in the inheritance system. I thought about my grandmother, who had built her fortune through decades of careful investment and smart business decisions. About the memorial garden I'd planted in her honor, using money these men believed I didn't deserve. About all the women who had died because men like Peterson thought female lives were worth less than male profits. Dr. Peterson, there's something I need to tell you. What's that? You picked the wrong woman. I stood up and walked to his office door, opening it to reveal Agent Sarah Chen and 6 other FBI agents waiting in his reception area. Dr. James Peterson, you're under arrest for conspiracy, fraud, and accessory to murder in the first degree. As they handcuffed him, Peterson looked at me with something approaching admiration. You realize this doesn't end it, he said calmly. There are others. People with more power, more resources. They won't make the same mistakes we did. Let them come, I replied. I'll be waiting. That afternoon, I sat in Agent Chen's car outside the federal courthouse, watching news vans arrive for what was already being called the biggest inheritance fraud case in American history. 37 arrests across 15 states, with more expected as the investigation continued. The media is calling you a hero, Agent Chen said, scrolling through her phone. The woman who brought down a criminal empire. I don't feel like a hero, I admitted. I feel like someone who got lucky and got angry at the same time. Sarah, what you did required incredible courage and intelligence. You saved lives. I nodded, but my mind was elsewhere. Peterson's words kept echoing, there are others. This case would make headlines for months. Marcus, Jake, Peterson, and their associates would spend the rest of their lives in prison. The families of their victims would finally get justice, and the money stolen from murdered women would be returned to their surviving relatives. But somewhere out there, other networks were watching and learning. Other men were studying our case, figuring out how to avoid the mistakes that had brought down Marcus's operation. Agent Chen, I want to make you a proposition. I'm listening. I want to work with the FBI. Officially. As a consultant on financial fraud cases targeting vulnerable women. She was quiet for a moment, considering the implications. That would be unusual. So was everything else about this case. But I have something other investigators don't have. I know exactly how these predators think. I know their methods, their psychology, their weaknesses. And I know how to make them believe they're smarter than they are. 2 weeks later, I received an official offer to join the FBI's Financial Crimes Division as a specialist consultant. My job would be to identify and infiltrate inheritance fraud networks, using the same techniques that had brought down Marcus's operation. My first case briefing included files on 12 suspicious deaths across 7 states, all involving recently widowed women who had died shortly after changing their wills. As I reviewed the evidence, I felt the familiar cold focus settling into my bones. Somewhere out there, men like Marcus and Peterson were targeting vulnerable women, believing they were too smart to be caught, too powerful to be challenged. They were about to learn what happened when they picked the wrong woman to underestimate. The war for justice wasn't over. It was just beginning. And this time, I had the full resources of the federal government behind me. 2 years later, I stood in a courtroom in Denver, Colorado, watching the final member of Marcus's network receive his sentencing. Life in prison without possibility of parole, the same sentence that had been handed down to Marcus, Jake, Dr. Peterson, and 43 other conspirators across the country. The judge's words echoed through the chamber. The systematic targeting and murder of vulnerable women for financial gain represents one of the most heinous criminal conspiracies this court has ever encountered. In the gallery behind me sat Rebecca Martinez, Marcus's first wife who had saved my life with that perfectly timed phone call. Beside her were family members of other victims, women and men who had lost mothers, grandmothers, sisters, and daughters to this network of predators. We had done more than just get justice. We had exposed a culture of misogyny so deep and systematic that it had operated for over a decade without detection, protected by the assumption that women's deaths were simply less worthy of investigation than men's. "Sarah," Rebecca said as we left the courthouse, "what's next for you?" It was a question I'd been asked hundreds of times over the past 2 years, by journalists, by FBI colleagues, by survivors of similar crimes who had reached out seeking help. What does someone do after dedicating their life to destroying the people who tried to destroy them? The answer was complicated. In the 24 months since Marcus's arrest, I had worked on 17 different cases involving inheritance fraud, elder abuse, and financial exploitation. The FBI's Vulnerable Victims Unit, which I had helped establish, had prevented an estimated 43 murders and recovered over $60 million in stolen assets. But the work had taken its toll. Living undercover for months at a time, pretending to be vulnerable while gathering evidence on dangerous criminals, had changed me in ways I was still processing. I was harder now, more suspicious, less willing to trust even the people closest to me. The woman who had planted daffodils in her grandmother's memory garden felt like a stranger from another life. "I'm thinking of writing a book," I told Rebecca as we walked toward our cars. "About the investigation, about the victims, about how we can protect other women from predators like Marcus." "That's a good idea. People need to know what really happened." What really happened was bigger than just my story. Over the course of the federal investigation, we had uncovered evidence of similar networks operating in Canada, the United Kingdom, and Australia. The systematic targeting of inherited wealth controlled by women was an international phenomenon, protected by the same cultural assumptions about female competency that had allowed Marcus to operate undetected for so long. "There's something else," I said. "I'm starting a foundation. The Elena Martinez Foundation, named after my grandmother. It'll provide legal and investigative support for families who suspect their loved ones were murdered for their inheritances." Rebecca smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from her in 2 years. She would have loved that. That evening, I drove back to Westfield, New Jersey, to the house I had shared with Marcus for 3 years. I'd moved back 6 months ago, after the FBI had finished processing it as evidence in the federal case. Most people thought I was crazy for returning to the scene of such trauma, but there was something important I needed to do there. I needed to reclaim my own life. The memorial garden behind the house had grown wild during the 2 years I'd been away. The daffodils my grandmother had loved were buried under weeds and overgrown grass, their bright yellow faces hidden by neglect and abandonment. I spent that Sunday afternoon clearing the garden, pulling weeds, trimming back the overgrowth, revealing the flowers that had somehow survived 2 years of neglect. As I worked, I thought about the women whose stories had become intertwined with mine, Patricia Chen and Maria Santos, Marcus's previous victims, the 137 women Peterson had admitted to killing, the countless others whose deaths we would probably never solve. I thought about my grandmother, the strong woman who had built a fortune through careful planning and hard work, who had trusted me to honor her legacy. She couldn't have known that her inheritance would make me a target, but she had raised me with the strength and intelligence I'd needed to survive that targeting. As the sun set over the garden, I made a decision that felt like the first purely personal choice I'd made in 2 years. I was done being defined by what Marcus and Jake had tried to do to me. I was done letting their betrayal determine the shape of my life. Tomorrow, I would start the Elena Martinez Foundation. I would continue working with the FBI to protect other women from inheritance fraud. I would write the book that would expose the full scope of what we'd uncovered. But tonight, I was just Sarah Martinez, a woman who had survived something terrible and chosen to use that survival to protect others. If you've been following this story from the beginning, you know it started with a phone call that changed everything. My husband forgetting to hang up after saying he loved me, then hearing him laugh with my stepbrother about how naive I was, how the drugs they were giving me would make me forget my own name, how they planned to steal my inheritance and have me committed. That phone call destroyed my world, but it also gave me the power to destroy theirs. Marcus Chen is serving life without parole in a maximum security federal prison. Jake Remington received the same sentence. Dr. Peterson died of a heart attack 6 months into his sentence, which probably saved taxpayers the cost of housing him for the next 30 years. The inheritance fraud network they built has been completely dismantled. The money they stole has been returned to the families of their victims. The corrupt officials who enabled their crimes have been prosecuted and imprisoned. But the real victory isn't in their punishment. It's in the 43 women who are alive today because we stopped their operations before those women became targets. It's in the changes to estate law that now require additional oversight when wealthy women die shortly after changing their wills. It's in the awareness we've created about the dangers faced by women who inherit significant wealth. Most importantly, it's in the message we've sent to every predator who thinks women are easy targets. We are not as naive as you think we are. We are not as helpless as you assume. And when you underestimate us, you do so at your own peril. 3 weeks ago, I received a letter from a woman in Seattle who had become suspicious of her new boyfriend after reading about my case online. Her instincts were right. He was part of a copycat network that we're now investigating. Her courage in reaching out may have saved her life and the lives of his other targets. That's my real legacy. Not the criminal case that made headlines, but the awareness that helps women protect themselves from the predators who see our wealth as their opportunity. To everyone watching this story, especially if you're a woman who has recently inherited money or gone through a major life change that has left you financially vulnerable, trust your instincts. Question people's motives. Verify everything. And remember that the people who truly love you will never rush you into financial decisions or make you feel stupid for asking questions. Your inheritance belongs to you. Your independence belongs to you. Your life belongs to you. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. And if you suspect you're being targeted, don't wait for more evidence. Contact the police, contact the FBI, contact the Elena Martinez Foundation. We will believe you, we will help you, and we will make sure you don't face it alone. Thank you for following my story. Please subscribe for more content like this, and check the description box below for resources about financial safety and inheritance protection. Most importantly, stay safe. Stay suspicious. And never underestimate your own power to fight back. The predators are still out there, but now they know we're watching.